She was found in her bed, partially burned, stabbed 3 times, one wound straight through the heart. Her dog had been silenced. Her maid lay unconscious in the next room. And yet somehow the money in the drawers had not been touched. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was something far more calculated, far more chilling. And what followed would divide an entire city, flood the newspapers for over a year, and end with 20,000 people watching a woman die in the street. This is the case of Luciana Borcino, and once you hear all of it, you may not be entirely sure who was truly guilty. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand this story fully, we need to go back to the Spain of the mid-19th century. Not the romantic, sun-soaked image that many people carry in their minds, but a country that was fractured, restless, and slowly trying to find its footing in the modern world. Luciana Borcino came into the world in Vigo, a port city tucked into the northwestern corner of Spain in the region of Galicia, where the Atlantic Ocean meets the rugged coastline. Vigo at that time was a modest town, home to roughly 8,000 people, surviving mainly on fishing and maritime trade. It was the kind of place where families knew each other, where reputations were built slowly and lost quickly, and where a young woman's future depended almost entirely on the family she was born into and the man she would eventually marry. Luciana was born sometime in the late 1830s, though no exact record of her birth has survived. She entered the world during one of the most turbulent periods in modern Spanish history. Just a few years before her birth, in 1833, King Ferdinand VII had died, leaving no male heir. The crown passed to his young daughter Isabella, but that succession was anything but peaceful. The king's brother, Don Carlos, had his own claim to the throne, and a substantial portion of the Spanish population believed that claim was legitimate. His followers, the Carlists, stood for traditional monarchy, the authority of the Catholic Church, and the preservation of regional customs. Isabella's supporters, by contrast, favored a more liberal and constitutionally governed Spain. What followed was a bloody and deeply divisive conflict known as the First Carlist War, and he fought primarily across the northern regions of the country. It ended in 1840 with Isabella's forces prevailing, though the underlying tensions it had exposed did not simply vanish. They lingered in the fabric of Spanish society for generations. Luciana grew up in the shadow of all of that. Her family occupied the modest but respectable band of provincial society, neither aristocratic nor impoverished, the kind of household that took pride in its standing and understood that standing had to be maintained through careful conduct in a sensible marriage. And a sensible marriage is exactly what Luciana made. She wed a man named José Vázquez Varela, and the two of them relocated to Madrid, the heart of the country, a city that was undergoing a remarkable transformation. New boulevards were being laid, theaters and cafes were opening their doors, and a growing middle class was filling the streets with ambition and aspiration. For a woman of Luciana's background, Madrid represented opportunity, respectability, and a life that her hometown in Galicia could never have offered. She settled into that life well. She became a recognized and respected figure in her neighborhood, and she gave birth to a son whom the couple named José Vázquez Varela Borcino. Then her husband died, and everything shifted. Widowhood in late 19th century Spain was not the end of a woman's independence, but it was a test of it. Under Spanish law in the 1880s, a widow retained the legal right to manage her own property and control her own finances. That was not nothing. In many parts of the world at that time, women had no such protections at all. But legal rights alone did not shield a widow from the vulnerabilities of daily life. Security, real security, depended on reputation, on prudence, and on ensuring that what her husband had left behind was managed wisely and protected carefully. Luciana was not left destitute. Her husband had provided well enough, and following his death, she found herself a woman of reasonably comfortable means. She settled into an apartment on Fuencarral Street, a respectable address in the city, and she built a life for herself there as a widow of standing. Neighbors regarded her as a woman who gave to those in need, though they also noted with some frequency that she was exacting in her expectations, quick to displeasure, and not the easiest person to work for or live alongside. She kept money in the apartment, a fact that was not particularly secret in the neighborhood, and she kept a dog, which many of those who knew her interpreted as a practical measure taken by a woman who understood she was alone and wished to remain cautious. She was known in the neighborhood simply as the Widow Varela. It was a title that carried both dignity and a quiet kind of sorrow. Her son, Jose Vasquez Varela Borcino, was a different matter entirely. He was known locally by nicknames, among them Varelita, and his reputation was the kind that mothers pray their sons never acquire. Whether it was the early loss of his father, or a character that simply bent toward disorder, or some combination of both, he had drifted into a way of life that brought him repeatedly into conflict with the law. He had been imprisoned on more than one occasion for acts of violence. Among the offenses recorded against him were striking his own mother and stabbing a woman he had been involved with, a woman named Dolores Gutierrez Robles. The relationship between Luciana and her son was not one of quiet estrangement. It was loud, volatile, and frequently witnessed. Neighbors on Fuencarral Street had grown accustomed to the sound of arguments spilling through the walls of her apartment. The subject of those arguments was almost always the same: money. She had it, he wanted it, and she refused to simply hand it over. That refusal was a matter of principle for her, but for him it appeared to be a source of growing bitterness. In June of 1888, Luciana hired a new domestic servant. Her name was Higenia Balaguer Sadalo, and she was 30 years old. She came with solid references. She had previously worked in several respectable Madrid households, and most notably, she had been employed by Jose Millán Astray, who at the time was serving as the interim director of the city's prison. He had spoken well of her, describing her as dependable and conscientious. Luciana had employed a number of maids over the years, but few had remained in her service for very long. The pattern of departures was consistent, and those who had left her employment tended to describe the same experience. A woman who demanded precision, who had little patience for error, and whose temper could turn without much warning. Higenia arrived at number 109 Fuencarral Street and settled into her duties quietly. She did not make a strong impression in either direction. She was orderly and unobtrusive. She kept to herself, and she gave no one any particular reason to notice her. The apartment she worked in occupied the second floor of the building, a layout typical of the period, with a long internal corridor running from the entrance and rooms branching off on either side. Beyond the walls of that apartment, the city she now lived and worked in was very much alive. Madrid in 1888 was a place hungry for news. Newspapers had multiplied considerably in the preceding decades, and the cafes and taverns of the city were filled each evening with conversations about politics, scandal, and the affairs of the day. Even those who could not read had access to the stories, because articles were read aloud, passed from table to table, discussed and debated in doorways and on street corners. There was an appetite for drama in Madrid, and before long, it would have more than it had bargained for. Just after midnight on the morning of the 2nd of July, 1888, the residents of 109 Fuencarral Street became aware of something wrong. A smell was moving through the corridors of the building. It carried the recognizable sharpness of oil and smoke, but underneath those was something else. Something that those who encountered it would not easily forget. The building's doorman, alarmed by what he sensed, went out into the street for help. The police were summoned and arrived shortly afterward. They forced their way into Luciana's apartment. What they found inside stopped them cold. Luciana Borcino was lying in her bed. Her body had been partially burned, and charred cloth clung to her remains. The room around her showed evidence of fire, but it was contained. Not the sort of devastation that an accidental blaze or a fire set carelessly would have produced. The investigators looked more closely. She had been stabbed 3 times. One of those wounds had pierced her heart directly. In a room nearby, they found Higenia Balaguer. She was unconscious, and all indications suggested she had ingested or been given some kind of sedative substance. The dog, which Luciana had kept as a precaution against exactly this kind of threat, had also been incapacitated, silenced, rendered harmless before anyone had entered that bedroom. The police moved carefully through the apartment, taking stock of what they saw. Drawers had been opened, certain belongings had been disturbed, but the money, the very thing a burglar would have come for, remained in the rooms where Luciana had kept it. If valuables had not been taken, And that detail, more than any other, told the investigators what they needed to know. This was not a robbery that had escalated into violence. The disorder had been arranged deliberately, staged to look like a burglary gone wrong, when in fact the killing had been the point all along. Hygieia, when she was first able to speak to officers, told them she remembered nothing. Not the night, not what had happened, not how her mistress had come to be lying dead a few rooms away. The investigators found this impossible to accept given everything they had observed. And as they dug deeper into her life and recent associations, the picture that emerged gave them further reason for doubt. Those who knew Hygieia described her as spending time with individuals who had been of interest to the police before, people whose reputations were built on idleness and petty dishonesty. One name that came up repeatedly was a woman called Dolores Avila, someone with a known reputation for sharp dealing and questionable conduct. Days passed. Then Hygienia's account changed. There had been a man, she said now. A stranger had entered the apartment and carried out the crime. But when investigators retraced every movement in and out of the building that night, they found nothing to support it. No one had seen an unfamiliar face. There was no evidence of forced entry. Her new story had no foundation. And then she named him. Jose Vasquez Varela Borcino, Luciana's own son. According to Hygieia, he had come to the apartment that night, killed his mother, and then compelled her to assist in concealing what he had done. She said he had forced her to go out and purchase oil, to scrub blood from surfaces, and to help set the body alight. She said he had made her swallow a substance that rendered her insensible, so that she could neither resist nor raise an alarm. The city absorbed this information with enormous appetite. Jose Vasquez Varela had a reputation that made the accusation feel plausible to many people. He had been violent before. He had quarreled with his mother about money before. And the neighborhood knew it, but there was a problem, a serious one. On the night of the 1st of July, Jose Vasquez Varela was documented as being held inside the city's prison. He had been charged with stealing a cloak and was officially confined. Hygienia's story on its face could not be true, unless, of course, he had found a way out. And here is where the case became something more than a murder investigation, because rumors began to move through Madrid suggesting that prisoners from respectable families, or those with the right connections, were sometimes permitted quiet liberties. Informal arrangements, unsupervised hours, and the man who had recommended Hygieia to Luciana in the first place, the man who had vouched for her character, was none other than Jose Millán Astray, the interim director of that very prison. Madrid did not handle this quietly. The press, already practiced in feeding the public appetite for drama, took the case and ran with it. Publications including El Liberal and La Correspondencia de España devoted daily columns to every new development, every rumor, every courtroom detail. Some of what they printed was accurate, some of it was not. The line between reporting and storytelling had blurred almost completely, and the public did not seem to mind at all. The city divided itself into factions. Those who believed that Hygieia had been coerced and that the real guilt lay with the son became known as Hygienistas. Those who believed Hygieia was the architect of the crime and that Jose had been unfairly dragged into it were called Varelistas. People gathered outside the offices of newspapers at night, waiting for the latest edition. The case was debated in cafes, in markets, in the homes of Madrid's working and middle classes. It had become the most talked about story in Spain. Hygieia, meanwhile, changed her account one final time. She now admitted that she had been the one to stab Luciana, but she insisted it had not been planned. What she described an argument that had begun over a broken vase. Her mistress had screamed at her, she said, with a fury that had terrified her. And in that moment of fear and humiliation, she had seized a knife and acted without thinking. She was not a murderer, her account implied. She was a frightened woman who had simply lost control. The investigators were not persuaded. The dog had been sedated, and that required forethought. The oil had been purchased in advance. The fire had been set with deliberate care. These were not the actions of someone responding to a sudden panic. This had been prepared. 4 people were eventually charged in connection with the death of Luciana Borcino, Hygieia Balaguer and Dolores Avila, Jose Vasquez Varela Borcino, and Jose Millán Astray. The trial did not begin until the 26th of March, 1889. Nearly 9 months had passed since the murder, and yet public interest had not cooled. If anything, it had sharpened. People queued through the night to secure a place in the courtroom. What they came to witness was less a legal proceeding, in the eyes of many, than the final act of a drama that had consumed them for the better part of a year. Hygenia's defense was led by Nicolas Salmeron, a figure of significant political stature, a man who had once served as president of the First Spanish Republic. His involvement in the defense gave the case added weight and drew the attention of people who cared about political reputation as much as legal outcome. Some believed his presence alone would influence the result. Others felt that even a man of his standing would struggle to overcome the evidence arranged against her. The prosecution was methodical. They presented a timeline constructed to demonstrate premeditation at every stage. The oil purchased beforehand, the dog sedated on purpose, the fire set not in panic but in calculation. Witnesses spoke to Hygenia's connection with Dolores Avila, who stood alongside her in the dock, accused of receiving stolen property and helping conceal evidence in the aftermath of the crime. The prosecution also made use of Hygenia's own history of contradictions. She had claimed to remember nothing. Then she had described an unnamed intruder. Then she had named the son. Then she had confessed, but framed the killing as an accident of temper. How, the prosecutor asked the court, was any version of her account to be trusted? When Hygenia took the stand herself, she stayed with that final story, the broken vase, or the screaming mistress, the sudden loss of control. Her defense counsel did what they could to present her as a woman ground down by circumstance, an exhausted servant pushed past her limits in a single, terrible moment. They kept returning to the question of Jose Vasquez Varela, pressing the suggestion of coercion and hidden influence, even where direct evidence could not be produced. But as the trial progressed, the case against both men weakened considerably. Documentation of the son's confinement proved resistant to challenge. There was nothing that placed him physically in that apartment. There was nothing that placed Milan Astray at the scene either. Gradually, the legal weight of the proceedings settled entirely onto the two women. On the 25th of May, 1889, the verdicts came. Hygenia Balaguer was found guilty of robbery and murder and sentenced to death. Dolores Avila was convicted as an accomplice and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Jose Vasquez Varela Borcino and Jose Milan Astray were acquitted. The appeals process extended the timeline considerably. For more than a year after the verdict, the sentence against Hygenia remained unexecuted while her legal team pursued every available avenue. None of them succeeded. On the 19th of July, 1890, Hygenia Balaguer was brought out for her execution before a crowd that contemporary accounts estimate at around 20,000 people gathered in the streets of Madrid. She was put to death by garrote, and she became the last person to be publicly executed in the city. In her final moments before the sentence was carried out, she called out two words: Dolores Duros, hard sorrows, or perhaps hard coins. No one was ever able to say with certainty what she meant. Some believed it was a reference to stolen money. Others read it as a final accusation, a last attempt to point a finger at someone she felt had escaped justice while she had not. Those words were debated in the days that followed, just as everything else about the case had been, and they were never satisfactorily explained. In the years after the execution, life at 109 Fuencarral Street gradually resumed its ordinary rhythms. The building itself eventually changed its number, the infamy of 109 replaced by the more anonymous designation of 95 as the city reorganized its streets. In time, the rooms where Luciana had lived and where she had died became a guest house, all occupied by travelers passing through Madrid with no knowledge of what the walls around them had once witnessed. But the case did not disappear from memory. Two phrases passed into everyday Spanish speech. To be more famous than the Fuencarral crime became a way of describing anything that had captured the public's imagination with unusual intensity. To be like the porter of Fuencarral became an expression applied to those who know nothing, see nothing, and can account for nothing, even when the evidence of events surrounds them. As for Jose Vasquez Varela Borcino, acquittal did not mark the end of his troubled story. In the years that followed, he was connected to another suspicious death, this time involving a woman who fell from a building on the Calle de la Madera. He was convicted in that case and sentenced to 14 years in prison. During those years, he found an unexpected occupation. He learned photography, and when he was released, he opened a studio and spent the remainder of his days behind a camera rather than behind bars. What the case of Luciana Borcino left behind was more than the memory of a violent crime. It left a question about how justice actually works and for whom. It exposed the way that newspapers, even then, could shape what people believed to be true, could amplify suspicion, and could transform a criminal investigation into public entertainment. It demonstrated how quickly a city, a country, could split into factions over a story, how class and reputation and association could determine whether someone was believed or dismissed. The humble apartment on Fuencarral Street is gone now in any meaningful sense. The street remains, but the building has been absorbed into the ordinary life of a city that has seen far more history than most. Yet the story of what happened there in the summer of 1888, a widow, a maid, a troubled son, a city watching every development, a woman going to her death before 20,000 spectators, that story has never entirely left. Some cases close neatly. Guilt is established, punishment is carried out, and the matter settles. This was not one of those cases, because to this day, there are those who read the evidence and wonder whether the full truth was ever actually spoken aloud in that courtroom, and whether the woman who went to her death on that July morning in 1890 carried more of the story with her than anyone was ever allowed to know. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you found this case as compelling as I did, please leave a comment below with your thoughts. I would love to know what you make of it, and make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what we have coming next.